Good evening and welcome to Midweek Devotional. I'm here in a little park right beside the water, kind of in the woods here in Gillette. I thought this would be a nice place to shoot a little video, to do the Midweek Devotional. We've been discussing the topic, what happened here? This is part 5. Last week we talked about about Adam. This week we'll be talking about Eve. The title is Eve was built, Adam was formed. And you're going to find this really kind of interesting. I did too when I discovered it a while back. Last week we looked at the formation of mankind, especially the male of the species, which we will see when we get to chapter 3, that this first man was given the name of Adam. Up until that point, he is always referred to as man or mankind or humankind. We concentrated on the construction of Genesis chapter 1, verses 26 and 27. In these two verses, we discovered that God created humankind, in which God said, "Let us make humankind in our image according to our likeness." God created humankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them, male and female. He created them. The passage leaves out a small detail, which Genesis chapter 2, verse 7 attempts to fill in the missing gaps that are created. And in Genesis chapter 2, verse 7, it says, "And the Lord God formed man of the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living being." The verse is describing the formation of Adam, in which a God who had spoken the earth into existence over 6 days now becomes intensely personal. For he comes down to this earth and forms Adam out of the dust of the ground, and then breathed into man the breath of life. God is telling us in the best way he can that he wants a relationship with humankind, so he chose to take a hands-on approach in creating them. But what about the first female? To better understand this, we need to take a look at Adam again for just a few moments. In verses 8 through 17 of chapter 2, God talks about the formation of the beautiful garden home that he created for Adam and Eve. We will explore this further when we get to Genesis chapter 3. Let me tantalize you with this one thought. The name Eden means desire, pleasure, or paradise. The very nature of the garden was to create with humankind a desire to know their Creator better, and it was designed to give pleasure to humankind as they drank in its beauty and partook of its beautiful tasting fruit for food and nourishment. The textures, the taste, the colors, the varieties were all designed to create pleasure and desire within humankind. As God wanted to have a relationship with humankind, he knew that they would need a relationship not only with him, but with each other. Now, this is absolutely ingenious how God created within humankind a desire for companionship, a desire for relationships. In Genesis chapter 2, verse 18, God says, "And the Lord said, it is not good for man to be alone. I will make him a helper comparable to him." Upon making this decision, you and I would immediately get to work creating a companion for the first man, but that's not the case with God. Instead, he puts the animals on display for Adam to see. He tells Adam, go ahead and name all these animals. And so we read this in Genesis chapter 2, verses 19 and 20. "Out of the ground the Lord God formed every beast of the field, every bird of the air, and brought them to Adam to see what he would call them. And when Adam called each living creature, it was That was its name. So Adam, the man, gave names to all the cattle, to the birds of the air, and every beast of the field. But for Adam there was not a helper comparable to him. Can you imagine the parade of animals, of birds that came past that first man? A male and a female wood thrush, a male and a female robin, male and a female Baltimore oriole, and a pair of hummingbirds flying past with wings flapping so fast one cannot see. A male and a female of a lion, a tiger, and a bear, an elephant, all the way down to a pair of rabbits, chipmunks, and squirrels. All had a companion, but as it says in verse 20, but for Adam there was not found a helper comparable to him. Adam is not dumb. He can see there is a male and a female of all the animals, but there is no one for him. The desire had been created in the first man's heart for companionship. God knew the first man needed companionship. As he had made the garden home to create within mankind a desire to know their Creator, he showed Adam the created animals and birds, all paired in the male and female, to develop within Adam a desire to have a companion comparable to him. Perhaps the conversation with God and Adam, the first man, went this way: "Oh my, how wonderful is the variety and beauty of what you have created. I cannot help but wonder about all you have created. However, God, I'm curious. You mentioned to me before that you thought it important that I have a companion. As I look upon these birds, these animals, I see they all have companions, a helpmate. Where is my companion?" This was no selfish desire on the part of the first man, rather a passion that had been given to the first man by God. The desire had been created by God. Now the moment was right. God caused a deep sleep to come upon Adam. Then God performed the first surgery. Not that something was wrong with Adam, but he performed the first surgery so he could remove a rib from Adam, that he might form a companion to Adam from that rib. And we see this in verse 22 in Genesis chapter 2. Then the rib which the Lord God had taken from the man, he made into a woman, and he brought her to the man. This is interesting. For in verse 7, when describing the creation of the first man, the word used was formed. The Hebrew word is yatsar, which means to form, mold, or fashion. Now in verse 22, the word used to describe the creation of the first woman, it says God made. The word used for made is hana, which means to build, establish, or construct, or rebuild. We see the same word hana is used in Genesis chapter 8 verse 20, where God commands Noah to build or construct an ark. But that's getting way ahead in our story. Let's stay with chapter 2. The symbols involved in this passage are as follows. God did not choose to take a bone from the man's foot or the top of his head because he wanted the woman to be inferior, referring to the foot, or superior, referring to the head. Instead, God chose to take a rib from the side of Adam to indicate that the first woman was to be a helper to the first man, but it goes way beyond that. For not only was she to be a helper, but she was to be his very equal. Yet she was built or constructed and reconstructed differently from the first man, for she had a different role. Yet when God looked at Genesis 1:26, and the wording here is critical to understanding, this is God speaking, "Let us make man in our image." The use of man in this verse is not limited to the male gender. Instead, it says, "Let us make humankind." And as we will see in a moment, humankind is made up of the male and the female of the species. Let us make mankind or humankind in our image according to our likeness. And then jumping down to verse 27, it's now talking about the action God took. Verse 26 is the thought, the purpose of God, and verse 27 is the result of action, that the thought and the purpose. So God created, from the study we understand the word man used here is mankind or humankind, referring to both genders of the species. So God created humankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Some translations use humankind or place in place of him a word which is more accurately translated as humankind. So God created humankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created humankind. Male and female, he created them. The construction of the verse and the fact that it repeats the phraseology within the verse tells us that this is something especially important to pay attention to, especially when we look at the formation of the first man and the construction of the first woman, who was made to be in equal status as the man, but was built with a different purpose. Therefore, it is in the combination of the two, the male and the female of the species, that the image of God is fully recreated. Isn't that beautiful? Wow, what a wonderful God. But many of you are not married, perhaps have never been married. Maybe you are divorced or separated, or your spouse may have passed away. This does not mean that you are loved any less than those who are married. God created them male and female, and he loves them equally, which is difficult for us in our world of sin to comprehend. It is equally difficult for those of us that have been educated in the system of Greek philosophy, which is so prevalent in Western society and culture, to grasp this concept that God can love you and you and you and you and me equally. The truth is, everyone, whether they are male or female, married or unmarried, are loved equally by God. God's love is equal because he is infinite, not limited by sinful human limitations, and because God is love. The first man, upon seeing the woman, his heart must have skipped a beat, and he probably lost his voice. When the man regained his voice from the astonishment of seeing such a beautiful person who was built by God to be his helper with him and an equal to him, the man in verse 23 says, "This is now bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman because she was taken out of man." And verse 24, "Therefore the man shall leave his father and his mother and be joined to his wife, and they shall become one flesh." The language does not specify one as being greater than the other. The language used does not indicate that one is more important than the other, but that they are equal. The only thing in life that should be more important to you than the one created equal to you is your relationship with God, who is your Creator. The phrase, "they shall become one flesh," cements the idea that both are equal with each other, yet to fulfill different roles. And verse 25 concludes this thought of this little study into the first couple of creation in that. Let's read it together, starting in verse 23, and please read into it the desire and the passion that God intended for there to be. And Adam said, "This is now bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman because she was taken out of man. Therefore man shall leave his father and his mother and be joined to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. And they were both naked, the man and his wife, and they were not ashamed." Many of us have been taught that the work of creation ended with the creation of humanity. However, it did not, and next week we'll look at how God finished creation. I hope you've enjoyed this beautiful little study over the last 2 weeks on how God took the time to create both Adam and Eve, and He created them equal. It is only sin that has given us the perception that they are unequal. God created them equal, but He created them to fulfill different roles. Because God is a God of relationship, and He knew that the first man needed a companion, needed to have a relationship with someone that was like him. And He created within Adam that desire by parading the birds and the animals past him. God is a relational God. God wanted a relationship with Adam and with Eve. And so He remade them relational beings so that they can relate to Him. And before sin, that was a face-to-face thing. I hope you'll come back next week as we see how creation was finished. Thank you.